Today we're going to learn about a common vocabulary structure, what it means and how it's used, and what you need to do when you see it. The structure is made up of two words, Bishlema and Ela. Those two words will not be adjacent to each other, but they'll be near each other. The word Bishlema means it makes sense. It's related to the word Shalom, which means peace. And Ela means but. You have this structure when the Gemara has told us at least two laws. I'll give you an example. There's a brisa which says that when one puts on tefillin, he puts on the tefillin on his arm first, and then afterwards he puts the tefillin on his head. When he takes off his tefillin, he takes the tefillin off his head first, and then he takes the tefillin off of his arm. So the Gemara says, Bishlema, it makes sense that when he puts on his tefillin, he puts on the tefillin on his arm first, and then on his head. The Gemara then explains why it makes sense. And it says, because the Torah says, tie it as a sign on your arm, and then afterwards it says, and it should be tefillin between your eyes. So the order is arm, then between your eyes. Ella, but when you take off your tefillin, you take off your shel rosh, the one from your head first, and then the one from your arm. And the Gemara says, what's the source for that? So the way the structure works is we have two laws, and the Gemara is saying one of them makes sense to us, but the other one doesn't. Now there can be different reasons why something makes sense or why it doesn't. In this case, we understand the source for the law in one case, but we don't understand the source for the law in the other case. So when you see the words Bishlema and Ela, there are going to be 4 steps. Step 1 will be stating the law that makes sense. Step 2 will be explaining why that law makes sense. They'll explain what makes sense about it and why. Step 3, which comes after the word Ela, will be telling us the other law, the law that doesn't seem to make sense. And step 4 will be asking a question on the law that doesn't make sense. So in the example that I gave, step 1 was saying the law, which is you put on your tefillin on your arm first and then on your head. Step 2 is explaining why it makes sense, because the verse says tie it on your arm, and then it says put it between your eyes. Then the Gemara says the word Ela, and it follows with the next step, which is the law that doesn't seem to make sense, which is that when you take off your tefillin, you take the tefillin off your arm, head first, and then off your arm. And the 4th step is a question on that, and the Gemara says, Minalan, what's the source for that? That was the question. So whenever you see this structure, what you need to do is make sure that as you're learning it, you know what the law is that makes sense, what the law is that doesn't make sense, why the law that makes sense actually does make sense, and what the problem is with the one that doesn't make sense. Sometimes the Gemara will just say the law in an abbreviated form. For example, let's say we had a theoretical brisa which said that pigs and cows are kosher. So the Gemara might say, Bishlema, it makes sense, cows, because they have split hooves and they chew their cud. But pigs, they don't have both signs, they only have one sign. And that's the problem. Now, in that case, if it was worded that way, you'll notice it didn't spell out the law. It didn't say it makes sense that cows are kosher. It just said it makes sense cows, meaning whatever we said about cows makes sense. So you need to make sure when you're learning this that you know exactly what the law is that the Gemara says makes sense, and then you have to understand what makes sense about it. Is it that we understand what the source is? Is it logical? Or we understand why the brisa needed to tell us this, meaning there's a chiddush to it? And then which law doesn't make sense and exactly why it doesn't make sense.